Okay, looks like we're live. How's everybody doing today? Welcome back to another episode of IBNW News. And if this is your first time here, we're basically a show that just loves to talk about news from the Christian standpoint. If this isn't your first time here, highly encourage you to like, share, and subscribe, as it really does help out a ton in getting some of this stuff out there. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get in today's update. And I wanted to go live with this just because I know a lot of people are following this case. So we got a new update from basically this Mica Miller case, and it comes from Leonardo Blair of the Christian Post, and it reads, for the title, U.S. Attorney's Office, FBI consulted as a part of the investigation to Mica Miller's death. Now, we'll summarize it as we kind of go on, but if you're not familiar with this case, there's plenty of other videos that I've done in this in the past and other people have done as well. Basically, it's just so sad. So I kind of want to give a big idea for this before we really start jumping into this. Number one, we are going to be talking about some sensitive topics here. So if you yourself or you know anybody has ever thought about harming themselves, please, by all means, seek help. People love you. People care about you. I love you. And I don't even know who you are, but I don't want to see the tragic harm come to somebody that comes from self-harm. There are people out there that love you. Reach out, get help. Find a pastor, find a friend, find a family member. There are people out there who want to help you out. Secondly, I tell you what, as a church, we need to do, and this is kind of like a random shotgun blast, so please don't take this personal, but as a church as a whole, Christianity as a whole, we need to do better of making sure that qualified people are in the pulpit, that are pastors, that are leaders inside the church. Because the more and more I read on about this case, the more and more I see that this man right here, John Paul Miller, had no business being a pastor, and there were clear, obvious signs that he was breaking the biblical principles that we use for leadership, and he was disqualified a long, long time ago. And this could have been a contributing factor if he would have been disqualified from ministry a long, long time ago, as he should have been, as per the Bible. Maybe this never would have happened. We don't know. That is speculation on my part. And lastly, as I keep on saying throughout this entire case, because this is a very, very heated topic throughout all of the internet, we need to make sure that we are staying grounded in facts. And if we make assumptions, we are not broadcasting those assumptions out loud as if they are facts. We need to make sure we are grounded in the truth. As Christians, our testimony means a lot, especially in things that deal with Christianity. Because overall, what most people see outside of Christianity when they see this, they see all these issues with John Paul Miller, and they will say, oh, he's a Christian leader. This represents Christianity, which is why we as Christians need to make sure that we aren't, kind of spouting speculation as facts. And secondly, that kind of backs up what I said earlier, why we need to call out these people who do not need to be in leadership and make sure that they are taken out of leadership because they are therefore disqualified by multiple reasons. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the article. So it says here, U.S. Attorney's Office and FBI consulted as part of an investigation into Mica Miller's death. Also, it says divorce documents show Mica Miller accused Pastor John Paul Miller of adultery. And we kind of talked about that on the last episode, that even while Mica had, there's no really simple way to say it, while Mica did kill herself, he was down, I believe it was in Charleston, South Carolina, with another woman. At least that's what some reports are saying. So let's go ahead and get into the article. So it says the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigations in South Carolina confirmed Tuesday that they have been consulted about the suicide of Mica Miller, the late wife of Pastor John Paul Miller of Solid Rock at Market Common in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Miller was found with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head at Lumber River State Park in Robeson County, North Carolina on April 27th. We have been in contact with the Robeson County Sheriff's Office, but we do not confirm, deny, or comment on investigations. The U.S. Attorney Office Public Affairs Specialist, Veronica R. Hill, emailed to the Christian Post in response to questions about the investigation. Now, let me just take a little pause right there. So basically, if you weren't tracking, there was a lot of speculation when this first came out that it wasn't a self-inflicted gunshot wound, but rather it was a murder. And the investigation, at least on the local side, has been completed, and they determined that the evidence is pretty solid that it is a murder. Now, what the not murder, as you were, self-inflicted gunshot wound. So the big question on a lot of people's minds is what drove her to do this? And what a lot of the speculation that's going on and what a lot of evidence is kind of building up to was that this pastor kind of drove her into doing this. And we're going to kind of dig into this as we get through this, but let's go ahead and keep reading. It says Kevin Wheeler, public affairs specialist at FBI Columbia, responded similarly when he asked about the Mica Miller case. I can confirm Robeson County Sheriff's Office consulted with the FBI. However, we cannot confirm or deny the potential existence of an investigation. Allegations of criminal conduct are reviewed for their merit with consideration of any applicable federal laws, Wheeler told the CP. So it's not as if that the FBI is investigating, but they are involved in the fact that they have been consulted. So let's keep on reading here, because some new revelations came out from this that honestly it's just sad. And once again, reinforces that whole thing I said before. This man had no business being behind a pulpit. He definitely had no business being in any type of leadership when it comes to a church. So on Monday, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office announced in a statement cited by ABC7 that they had asked both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI in South Carolina for help with the case. The Robeson County Sheriff's Office has been in contact with the United States Attorney's Office and Federal Bureau of Investigation in South Carolina since the early stages of the Mica Miller investigation. Based on the information gathered during the investigation and jurisdiction reasons, the Sheriff's Office has requested the assistance of both agencies, the statement said. No other information will be released at this time. Anyone with information pertaining to the Miller investigation in South Carolina is asked to contact the Columbia, South Carolina FBI office, and they give the phone number 803-551-4200. The article continues and says, although Robeson County Medical Examiner Dr. Richard Johnson ruled that the death was a suicide, and family members and friends have raised significant concerns about abuse in her marriage to Pastor Miller, age 44. They allege the abuse contributed to the deterioration of her mental health and likely drove her to suicide. They also have been clamoring for him to be held accountable for her death. The article continues. It says Pastor Miller has insisted in an interview with the Christian Post, that's the article that we read when this whole thing kind of first kicked off, when we first started talking about it, that his wife was bipolar. She had bipolar 2 disorder, and her roller coaster attitude towards taking her medication pretty much drove her to suicide. He made the claim that she wanted to stop taking her medication, and there's a lot of mixed reports about that as we're going to keep reading on. In an affidavit cited by News Nation, Mica Miller's father, Michael, alleged that Pastor Miller claimed his daughter was not taking her medication properly and needed to be hospitalized in February 2023. Michael noted, however, that Mica just decided to take one pill instead of 2, which was allowed under her medication regime. So here we have conflicting statements. You have Mica Miller's father saying basically, hey, look, she was taking her meds. She just lowered the dosage, which was allowed by her doctor, her regime. And then you have Pastor Miller, or ex-Pastor Miller, better to say, coming out and saying she was refusing to take it, and, made up this claim that some woman in church told her that she was going to be healed. Well, okay, I don't want to say made up, because there I'm not following my own rules, but had this claim that a woman in church told her, oh, God's going to heal you. You don't need this medication. And she believed it. So she stopped taking the medication altogether. Where the truth lies, there's conflicting statements, like we said. Throughout a lot of their interactions, John Paul was exaggerating a lot of things and making up things so that he could, in fact, get Mica hospitalized against her will. News Nation producer Allison Weiner, who reviewed the affidavit, told News Nation's Banfield. In a sworn affidavit shared on X by Protestia, Protestia is another news site that's out there that's been covering this a lot, and filed as part of her application to serve as special administrator for her sister's estate, Sierra Francis said Mica Miller, age 30, had served her husband with divorce papers on April 25th and was looking forward of being free from him because he was abusive. And this is where a lot of the speculation kind of started to begin, because here this woman had just served her husband divorce papers. This man has already been divorced before. That's not a good look for a pastor. I mean, number one, if you are a Christian and you are a pastor and you are divorced, you are no longer qualified for ministry as per 1 Timothy chapter 3. It's bad enough that he, for somehow, was able to still keep his job because nobody saw fit to remove him from that position or stop him from getting a new position at a church elsewhere. I don't know the exact history of the background. Regardless of it, he was disqualified, but yet he was still a pastor. And so a second divorce would look very, very bad for him. And therefore, when, she basically served him these papers and then she dies just not too long after that, it raised a lot of suspicions in people's heads. So let's keep reading on. My sister was hopeful for a future after filing for divorce from John Paul, Francis wrote in an affidavit. My sister also expressed to me that she was fearful that she would not make it to the divorce and that her life would be taken from her. It is my belief, based on conversations with my sister, that she told multiple people, including other family members, Francis explained. And there was some news clips out there, and I'm not going to play it on here because, copyrights, taking other people's news sources in the form of video and whatnot. Basically, they were saying that they were showing videos of Mica sharing stuff on Instagram, looking very happy, looking very hopeful, which isn't always the indication that somebody, there's a lot of people, let's face it, on social media today that put up a front one way that everything is perfect, and then behind closed doors, it's obviously not. We'll go ahead and continue on, but it was just something that some people were raising as a potential concern. So it said, Mica stated to me on many occasions, if I end up with a bullet in my head, it was not by me, it was JP. That's wow. Mica forwarded a family group message notifying us that Mr. Miller was served the divorce papers on April 25th, 2024. Francis added, on April 27th, 2024, my sister, Mica A. Miller, was found dead as a result of a gunshot wound in Lumberton, North Carolina. If you didn't see that part of the story, basically, she went up to a state park, and that is where they found her body. Like I said, the investigation from the local authorities there concluded that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But like I said, the family is very adamant that either no, it was not, or two, he drove her to do this. In a separate affidavit supporting Francis's application to serve as special administrator, Mica Miller's brother, Nathaniel Francis, a member of Solid Rock at Market Commons, said his late sister also confided in him about her marriage struggles. Nathaniel Francis noted that he left Solid Rock at Market Common after several years there, quote, due to the behaviors I observed. He said shortly before her death that Mica Miller reported to police that her estranged husband was viciously stalking her, which is something that we've seen pop up throughout this case in different reports. Mica made several police reports over the last few weeks of her tires being slashed and tracking devices found on her car. In Mr. Miller's email forwarded to me, he apologizes to Mica for the tires and causing damage to her vehicle, Nathaniel Francis wrote. And obviously, if he's got email to back it up and it's proven to be true, I mean, that's some serious stalker things to do. I mean, the guy is 44 years old and he's acting like a little kid slashing tires if this is the case. And it seems like there's strong enough evidence to say that it is. Mr. Miller's email to my sister continued to state that he was angry when Mica confided or put her family before him, and that made him want to hurt her. In his words, quote, when someone hurts me, I try to hurt them rather than forgive. Oh, does that sound like a pastor? Does that sound like a pastor to you? Instead of forgiving, I try to hurt them back. I mean, I get it. Christians are not perfect. But does that sound like a Christian to you that is actively trying to be, who's repentant of their sins, who's actively trying to be more Christ-like? As Christians, we make mistakes, but we don't actively live in our sin, like, saying here. He acknowledges that there's something wrong with him, but he doesn't do anything to fix it. Instead, he just keeps going with it. Anyway, it's not an act that a Christian would do, and much less an act that a pastor would do, because a pastor has a much higher standard, and that's biblical. And instead of me forgiving you, I just attack and try to cause pain. Very, very sad. A week ago, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office presented a detailed report of, quote, clear and compelling evidence showing that Mica Miller took her own life, including a 911 call in which she told a dispatcher, I am about to kill myself, and I just want my family to know where to find me. And I did listen to that. phone call, it did seem very, very convincing based off of that this was her decision. But then again, once again, who truly knows in the end except for God? In divorce documents cited by the Daily Mail, Mica Miller alleged last October that her husband had repeatedly committed adultery during their marriage. She also claimed that her husband would become hostile towards her when she pushed back against his behavior. And this is something that's kind of been collaborated on through multiple different people talking about this. Once again, like I said, according to some other news reports, specifically an article from Protestia, that he was in Charleston, South Carolina on the day of her death with another woman at some event or something like that. Plaintiff Mica is informed and believes that the defendant, John Paul, has and is currently engaging in acts of adultery with women whose names are known to the defendant, the complaint alleges. Sorry, got to read. Plaintiff has not condoned the adultery. The plaintiff would show that she left the marital home due to the defendant's philandering and as well as the defendant's growing hostility towards the plaintiff. In other words, she left because he was cheating and she left because she feared for her own safety. The defendant has threatened to throw the plaintiff's belongings in the yard, lock the plaintiff out of her own home, and has defamed and demeaned the plaintiff before a congregation of people. It continues, which honestly I thought was made kind of clear when this man, when he announced his wife's death, the day after it happened, after he preached a sermon where he seemed like everything was fine, and then all of a sudden at the end goes very somber. He, instead of, I don't know, I wouldn't even be preaching on Sunday. That's just me. But he instead seems like he's almost making fun of her in a way, talking about her mental health issues, which are very private, which, belong to her and the family. But yet he seemed fit to go ahead and talk about them all over the place during that sermon when he decided to just randomly announce, oh yeah, she died. I know I just preached this sermon. I look completely normal. And my wife died by suicide. Sorry, guys. It was really, really weird and out there. We played that in, I think, the first video that we did on this. Let's keep going. Their relationship started with both of them cheating on previous spouses. This is where it kind of gets into, like I said, where this man, John Paul Miller, was not qualified for ministry because while he was a youth pastor with her, he ended up cheating on his wife with her. Now, we don't know the exact time, whether or not that's when she was, because she was 14 years old, I believe it said at the time. Mica made the claim in police calls that he had been grooming her since the age of 10. I don't know when the exact cheating went on, but and the article may go on to say it here in a little bit, but basically this man cheated on his wife with another woman. How was he still able to be a pastor? I mean, it's just dead wrong. Is dead wrong. And churches need to do better of actually holding up that biblical standard and stopping this from happening. Otherwise, things are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. I get upset about it because I care about the church and I care about the image, because real Christians out there don't act like this. Real pastors out there do not act like this. Let's keep on going. It says in 2017, the affidavit also highlighted the Daily Mail Miller's first wife, Allison, who's the mother of 5 children, accused him of engaging in sex acts with minors younger than 16 and having an addiction to prostitutes. Wow. I mean, this was a pastor. I mean, it just kind of gets into more of this man's sick and twisted mindset that his first wife said he was accusing him of sex acts with minors younger than 16. That probably could have been Mica. We don't know. And having an addiction to prostitutes, a pastor with prostitutes. I mean, what is the world coming to? And how is this not called out? She also alleged that Miller was caught in an affair with Mica in 2015 when she was working as their babysitter and married to his then best friend, Jeremy Diaz. Wow. In the Army, we have a term for that. We call him a Jody, the person who sleeps with their best friend's wife, specifically while they're gone. That's horrible. The article keeps reading on. It says, our marriage and my husband's career were less than stable at the time because at the time my husband's affair was discovered. He had previously admitted to both me and our congregation. So the congregation knew that he had an addiction to prostitution, Allison wrote in an affidavit seeking alimony. How was this man still a pastor? This is so wrong on so many levels. He also confessed to me that other staff members of the church, that he had sexual encounters with young females from the church who were under the age of 16. This is so wrong. This is so wrong. Number one, it's wrong that it happened inside of a church. Number two, it's wrong that it happened, period. And number three, it is so wrong that this man somehow was able to become a senior pastor of a church. Church, we need to take the leaven, as the Bible talks about. We need to take the leaven, remove the leaven out, because only a little bit of leaven will spoil the whole lump. You let in and tolerate a little bit of sin inside your church, and it is going to it's going to basically infect and infest the rest of that church. And obviously, once again, I want to make clear, we as Christians are not perfect. We as Christians do have sin, but the difference is do we acknowledge that sin and realize that it is wrong? And number two, if you're a leader, you are exercised, or even a member, you are exercised in church discipline, meaning you are removed from membership. You are removed from that congregation for a period of time in order to reflect upon what you did, or as the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, delivered over to Satan so that the flesh may perish, but the soul may yet be saved. We need to exercise church discipline. This is so sad. Instead of removing Miller as a leader, Allison stated that the church officials demanded he get counseling for his sex addiction, but he refused to get counseling, which caused many of the members to leave. Just read this. Think about what weak church officials, church leadership you have. So the church officials tell him, get counseling instead of removing. And then he doesn't even go and get the counseling. So what happens? Instead of the leaders removing him like they should have, that shouldn't even have been an option. I mean, he should have got counseling afterwards. Then they should help him get provided for that counseling, obviously, because as church, we care for our members. But instead of doing any of that, they do nothing. And it just causes members of that church to leave. Well, good on those members for realizing that church is not biblical. When he refused, the majority of the church left, Allison wrote. Miller previously acknowledged the affair with Mica and being forced to start over at his church in an interview with the Christian Post, but he did not share the details alleged by Allison. In one of the latest allegations against the pastor, according to News Nation, Miller confessed to and this is so sad, I read about this. Miller confessed to posting a nude photo of Mica, his wife, a nude photo of his wife, Mica, on social media as she tried to divorce him, probably in order to shame her or whatever. You just heard he'd rather get even with people and hurt people than forgive people, even though he probably did nothing that was worthy of forgiveness at that time. Now, granted, us as Christians do once again want to make clear we are to forgive people. That is the Christian nature. God forgave us when he had absolutely no reason to forgive us whatsoever. We should forgive people. That should be the Christian attitude. But forgiving doesn't always necessarily mean reconciling. I'm sorry for putting a picture of you on the internet, he said in an apology email cited by the news outlet. It was for less than 1 hour and immediately taken down. See, this is the problem with people who are very narcissistic. And I think that's honestly one of the best ways to describe John Paul Miller is narcissistic, because narcissistic people will always try to justify what they did, even when they know it's wrong. Does this sound like an apology? I'm sorry for putting this nude picture of you on the internet, and then tries to justify it by saying it was for less than an hour and immediately taken down. So sad. This is so sad. I was hurt that you are telling everyone horrible, intimate details of my past sin, and I just wanted to try to hurt you. Please forgive me. It was evil of me to do that. This is so sad. Because like I said, it goes back to what I was saying in the original. Like if people would have just stopped this man from even being a pastor or a leader in a church, could this have prevented this from happening? I don't know. Additionally, there was some other news that I wanted to share with you that came out on the same day. Once again, it was an article by Leonardo Blair from the Christian Post, and it said Pastor John Paul Miller, and I heard this recording is really, really weird. Pastor John Paul Miller claims he tried to raise his wife from the dead after her suicide. I don't know. It's just so sad. He's not Jesus, I promise you that, because that's the only man who could raise people from the dead. Well, there's, see the apostles doing it, but those signs and wonders gifts that we saw in the early church in the Old Testament are obviously no longer around anymore. We don't see that happening because the gospel is spreading. That was the main point. The gospel is spreading. Let's keep reading. It says, in a revelation that appeared to some as almost unusual, at his announcement of the suicide of his wife, Mica Miller, Pastor John Paul Miller of Solid Rock at Market Common in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, said he tried to raise her from the dead. The grieving pastor made the revelation that he eulogized his late wife during a May 5th memorial service at the church. As Christians, of course, we know she's not there. She's in heaven, worshiping, enjoying, probably haven't sick at the time. Look down. I don't know what he's trying to say there because it's a quote. Miller said in the 35-minute recording of the service posted by the church on YouTube over the weekend. But I've been down to the body about 4 times this week, and each time it still didn't hit me that she was gone, Miller said. I thought she was going to wake up. I even tried to raise her from the dead one time this week. There's something obviously really, really wrong with this man. I mean, if it wasn't made clear before, hopefully it was. It definitely should be made clear now. Miller then explained that he genuinely thought he had raised his wife from the dead at one point, but the person he thought was Mica's sister. And I heard that in the, it goes on to read it. Basically, he goes on through this story about how he thought he saw her at the mall and ends up being her sister. And it's just so weird. Pastor Miller mentioned, and spiritual advisor Reverend Charles Randall recently announced to congregants at Solid Rock Marketplace that Miller had been relieved of all of his ministerial duties. Finally, it should have been a long time ago, whoever this Charles Randall guy is, his spiritual advisor. It's time for a healing, counsel, and guidance pursuant to our governing instrument. Randall told the Christian Post that he has no plans to permanently remove Miller from the pulpit because God had not told him to do so. Wake up. Wake up. How many things need to come out about this man to show that he is not qualified to be a pastor? You are going to have to answer to God for that. 1, Charles Randall, and 2, John Paul Miller. You're going to have to answer to God for all the horrible things that you have done throughout your life. And especially this Reverend Charles Randall, who supposedly has this, ability to be able to remove him, but will not do so because God had not told him. This is so sad. Despite allegations against Miller painting him as the Bible, I'm sorry, guys, the Bible lays it out so clear what the qualifications for a pastor are. And this man, John Paul Miller, had been disqualified on multiple times for doing that. The very fact that this man was still in the pulpit after everything that was coming out about him, everything is just so sick and so sad. And in fact, let's just go head over to, I'm bringing it up right now, to a Bible verse that really talks about this qualification for the pastor, because honestly, I think it's something that needs to be reminded. We keep talking about it. So I'm going to go ahead and take us over to 1 Timothy chapter 3, where it talks about the qualifications for a pastor. And I'm bringing it up right now. All right, so over here, as you can see, this is 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm using BibleGateway.com, a great resource if you ever just kind of want to read the Bible. And I'm actually going to switch over to the NASB 95 because that's where I know it best. But great resource when you're going through and you're reading the Bible. You do got to just click out some ads, but they have so many different versions on here. But let's go ahead and read. Overseers and deacons, that's used interchangeably with the word pastor. So it says that it is a trustworthy statement if any man aspires to the office of overseer, that is a pastor. It is a fine work that he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, So he fails there. Basically, that's nobody should be able to point to him and say this person is, bad. They may not like what he says. They may not, X, Y, and Z, but basically they shouldn't be able to place any type of blame on him. It also says then a husband of one wife, which is better translated as a one-woman man, meaning he is totally dedicated to his wife. A temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, and free from the love of money. He must be able to be one who manages his own household well. Well, definitely missed out on that one, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man doesn't know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? He must not be a new convert, so he will not become conceited and fall into condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. I can count multiple things based off of that made John Paul Miller not qualified for ministry, especially the fact of how many times he was cheating on his first wife and then cheating on his new wife, not to mention the underage sexual acts, all these other, it's just so sick and sad. But this is the standard that we have, church, and we need to go by this standard. If somebody fails to meet these standards, they are no longer qualified for ministry and should not be a pastor. This man should not have been in the position that he was, but yet he was. And now look at what happened. How many other people has he twisted and deceived and done things to that we don't know about yet? Maybe it'll come out. He said this would not be Pastor Miller's first time weathering a scandal, and it goes on to the affidavit that we talked about with previously. But just the fact that this man was trying to make claims that he tried to raise his dead wife from the dead. It's just sad and just shows you the state of this is in. But anyways, we'll see what comes up out of this. I mean, the more and more we read into this case, the more and more we see what a deranged man this was. Whether or not he was a contributor to Mica Miller's death, we don't truly know. A lot of the signs do look as if this man was an abusive, whether that be mentally abusive or physically abusive. A lot of signs testimonies point to that this man was caught up in infidelity, that he was sexually immoral on multiple different levels. So we can honestly say those could have been contributing factors to what Mica Miller did to herself. Whether or not that's the case, obviously we let the courts decide. We figure that out. I was listening to some attorneys talking about it, saying that these cases where somebody drives someone to suicide, that you basically have to have very overwhelming, compelling evidence in order to nail them on that, I guess you would say. So that, I understand that, because anybody can really make up any claim after that. You don't want the pendulum to swing from one side all the way to the other. That's why we have these rules and process and things of that nature. But anyways, we are live. So if you have anything, by all means, please drop a comment. Let your thoughts be known about this. Once again, I do want to say, please try to stay away from asserting speculations as facts, and make sure that, hey, if this is an assumption, it's an assumption, and it's in a hypothesis. It's not a fact. And make sure, so please just be respectful of that. Be respectful of the families involved here. But anyways, that's about all we got for this episode. And I hope y'all have a wonderful one. And just please pray for this family. It's just, everything about this is just so sad on so many different levels. All right, this is Tim, IBNW News. Please, by all means, like, share, subscribe if you do enjoy this content. We'll keep covering this as more of it comes up, but we will see you on the next one.